we're going to do a really quick review of the piece movement, and then we're going to get right into the lesson for today. So let's just start, right? Let's start with the pawns. So we're only looking at our pawns. We're playing white. And pawns, they can move 1 square on their first turn or two squares. So that's their unique ability. So right now I could move my E pawn to the 4th square. I could go all the way to E4. I could also have gone to E3. Notice that I can't go diagonal. So I cannot move diagonally to the F file. I'm moving 1 or 2 squares. And then after that, let's say black plays this move. I have the option to pass it by. I can play pawn to E5. I can't go to E6 though, so I can't go here. Or I can capture. So I could capture that pawn right now as well because pawns capture diagonally. The next piece we're going to look at, we'll be adding them back slowly, one by one. Let's look at the rooks. So we have 2 rooks. Usually they start on A1 and H1, but I'm going to have them out here for demonstrative purposes. This rook has the ability to swing across the board as this is kind of their range. And so, but it can go any square in between that as well, which is pretty cool, really powerful piece, especially later in the game. And so right now I could actually capture that pawn if I wanted to, although that rook could recapture me, so that's not really good for me, right? The next is the knight. So knights actually have a unique ability to hop, the only piece in chess that can hop over other pieces. So this knight could hop all the way to C3 if it wanted to, or go to A3. It can't land on its own piece, so it can't go to D2. But let's just look at it move a little bit. So maybe the black one will move here. And now we have even more options. So we can go to B5, D5, E4, C4. So their movement's a little bit tricky, but it'll get really intuitive soon. It kind of goes like 1, 2, and then kind of in one direction like that. Or you can see also, you can watch the knight go 1, 1, 2. So it's kind of these small L shapes, and that defines their movement. Okay, and now let's look at the bishop. So we'll put our light squared bishop and our dark squared bishop. Notice how they are on opposite colors, right? And this is really important for them in particular because they actually cannot change colors. So let's say both our pawns have freed up space for the bishops. Let's do a couple more pawn moves just to give them space to breathe, right? So these bishops can go all the way on this long diagonal, or it can hop out this way through that shorter diagonal. And likewise for our dark squared bishop. So this bishop can go all the way over there and anywhere in between. And it can also go that way. So these bishops are great long-range weapons that will be definitely seen in the form of checkmate. So we are going to look out for white's light squared and bishop in particular. So this F1 bishop is going to be very important later on. Let us go back a tick and talk about our queen. So our queen is kind of a combination of bishop and rook. The queen can move also all the way across on a long diagonal. It can also go like a rook and go kind of straight in these straight and vertical and horizontal lines. So the queen could go here, and on its very next turn, it could take the rook on H8, and it could also slide across and take A7. So the queen is just a super mobile, powerful piece, which is why our dads are trying to use it really early because it's so powerful, right? But I'm going to show you a way to make her look silly because she does not want to be captured by a lesser piece, which was basically any piece in the game. So we're going to scare her away when we play against the form of checkmate. The last one I want to look at, sorry, all these extra pawns are not really needed. Let's look at the white king, right? So our last, but definitely not least piece on the board is its actually movement is most similar to the queen of all pieces, which is kind of weird, but it only can go 1 square at a time. So it's kind of like your grandpa, you could say. So he's super one square at a time only. But his key secret move is that he can actually do this move that completes the opening. So you play this in the beginning, maybe first 5 to 10 moves. You can do what you call castling. So you can go like that. So it looks really weird. Let's slow down. So let's see what's happening. The king's going to go 2 squares, and the rook is going to slide around to the other side. So that's a really powerful and important ability that it has, because oftentimes you'll have, your pawns right here, maybe a knight here. And so when you castle, it actually becomes a lot safer for protecting your king, and you get to activate this awesome rook on F1. So that's the basics on piece movement. There is a couple more rules here and there, but I would love to just get into the heart of the matter, which is defending against the 4-move checkmate, right? So now that we know how the pieces move in general, let's look at something that will help you right away and be winning more games. So today is my favorite lesson that I've taught so far. Today I'm going to be teaching everyone watching this stream how to beat your dad at chess, the 101 guide with myself, Chess Master Kyle. And specifically, we're going to go over how to survive the opening against our opponents, specifically the 4-move checkmate. So how do you defend against that, and how do we eat our opponents up? So let's just dive right into it. So first, understanding what kind of opponents we're talking about when we say beating our dads, right? Of course, it could be our dad or our mom. It could be just someone that likes to win fast, right? Because dads are busy people, so they're going to be our archetype or vision of this kind of player that we're competing against. And these busy people will try to beat us quickly, so they are going to most likely try the 4-move checkmate on us, right? So, but thankfully for us, we are going to prepare against it right now. And we are also going to use some tactics, which are kind of 2 or 3 move combinations of moves that will win us what we call in chess material, or gaining the advantage by taking a couple of their pawns or their pieces. So with that said, let's keep going. Let's dive right in. So how we play chess against these people, right? Against our dads, is we have dad method, which is not at all a real thing, but I'm creating it now to just like create things to remember when we play our dads, right? So the first D, stands for develop. Developing in chess means bringing out our minor pieces first, and then working to castle our kings. So those are the 2 key parts of the development stage, which happens in the opening. The next part that I'm going to talk about, the next part of dad, is anticipate. So A stands for anticipate. And what that means is we are going to anticipate what our opponent's next move is. So if they are planning to checkmate us on a certain square in the 4-move checkmate, we are defending our F7 pawn, which I'll point out later. And so we have to figure out a way to defend that ahead of time. The last D stands for dominate. And when we talk about dominating the center, what that really means is those 4 squares in the center of the board and having control over them with pawns and pieces, because those are the best pieces to control the center, not queens. So we are going to dominate the center as a way of defending. Today's lesson, again, as we're talking about, is avoiding the 4-move checkmate, right? Or the lazy dad opening, you could call it. So in this opening, right, it's very important to protect Freddy. Freddy is the nickname we have for pawns that are on the F file. So this is white's Freddy pawn. And that pawn that was just captured, you can imagine it used to be there, no longer, is the Freddy pawn, where this queen is, the white queen is captured. So We need to just things to think about when we are setting up our first game is to protect and develop with our pieces and use those to defend our Freddy and Eddie pawns. So Eddie, the E pawn, right? You see this E file and the Freddy pawn. So those two are extremely important when thinking about the four move checkmate. So the next part that we need to think about is scaring the queen away, right? This queen should never have gotten this far across the board, especially in the first four moves. So how do we actually push the queen away, make her run around and waste time during the opening is a very, very important thing to think about. And we're going to use primarily our knights. So our knight is one of them's on c6, one of them's on f6, but we need to figure out a way to position them and time it with our pawn moves to scare the queen away. And for advanced players, I'm going to show you an amazing trick that can actually win you a piece in many situations or put a lot of pressure on your opponents who try to use the four move checkmate. So here we go. The first move, as many of you have seen playing chess, if you've watched a video about it or you've had a lesson or your dad taught you, they probably taught you to play this move first, right? This pawn is now occupying the center, which is great. One of these four squares. And it also is attacking this square in particular, which is in the center as well, right? So let's just say this pawn wanted to go to d5, then we could easily just capture it and put black in an uncomfortable spot with the queen, right? It doesn't really want to go out too early. So, but black doesn't play that. In this opening, that I definitely recommend for most beginners, it's the most fundamental way to play chess, and it is definitely to copy that and play the king's pawn. So it's very symmetrical, right? They're copying our move, very standard. They have the same idea, and they are putting a pawn in the center and as well as putting pressure on this square d4. And the opening is all about controlling the center. So great move. This is what we're going to be playing. You know, this is the first sign that your dad is going to go for the four move checkmate. It's coming right now. You ready? So this queen usually should not move, but in the four move checkmate, or what we call the scholar's checkmate, or our dad's attempt to beat us, right? The queen is going to hop out all the way on its long diagonal and pose an immediate threat to what pawn? So right, that's the e5 pawn, right? If black was to ignore that and not realize and maybe try to scare the queen away prematurely by playing knight to f6, this queen could happily gobble up that pawn on e5, and white would be very happy, right? So if you can get a free pawn that's undefended, you definitely want to take it. So we don't want to move that knight. We need to figure out a way to defend this pawn and also keep control in the center, but also keeping in mind maybe what else is white trying to do here. So just maybe think about that for a second. As most of our games will go, we're going to defend it with our knight. So if this queen was to capture, we have this amazing defender protecting our e5 pawn. So the queen does definitely not want to get involved over there now. But of course, here comes the real threat of what we were worried about. And what the checkmate is all about is bring this bishop out. So when you see this bishop, a diagonal long-range piece, combined with the queen, another diagonal long-range piece, you have to think, as black, what square of mine is now vulnerable, and what is white going to do next? So what is my dad trying to do to me? So, and the answer is, as we were talking about in the PowerPoint, is the Freddy pawn, right? The Freddy pawn is being attacked by two different pieces, and right now only our king is defending that pawn. And so if we were to ignore the threat and just kind of keep developing life as normal, we would get checkmated, right? So you see this little hashtag sign, that means checkmate in chess notation. So we need to, because we can't capture, right? Because this beautiful bishop is protecting the queen. So we need to figure out a way to defend our Freddy pawn using the dad method by developing anticipating and dominating the center, right? So how do we defend this pawn? If people know the optimal move, definitely type it in the live chat. And if not, it's okay. We'll get into it. There are lots of responses of how to defend this pawn, but there is one that is the most active and the one that we're going to learn today. But go ahead, take a minute. Okay, so the move we're going to learn today is actually a pawn move. So a lot of people might have been thinking, okay, my Freddy pawn's under attack, so let me maybe bring my knight out, defend it, because this knight could have hopped out and protected, right? That's not a terrible move, but I think there's a better move. The queen, maybe. The queen was thinking maybe I can come to e7, maybe I can come to f6, right? That's also not bad. I like that move. The queen here would be protecting f7, right? But also we don't really like moving our queens out if we don't have to, right? The queen is much more powerful when we use her later on. So the move I'm actually going to show you today and that I want you to actually remember and memorize is pawn to g6. What pawn to g6 does is it breaks this double attack on our Freddy pawn, right? The most important thing. But it also what we call in chess gains a tempo. Gaining tempo is incredibly important in chess. Tempo is another word for saying time. So we're kind of like buying ourselves time and making this queen on h5 move again. So white is about to break a major principle, which is moving the queen twice. So of course, our dads are going to just probably move back, retreat a little bit, but of course still try to do the cheeky fast dad win. So from this f3 square, this pawn on f7 is actually under attack. And so the checkmate would just be 5 moves instead of 4. So now we need to deal with this threat one more time. So if you can think of a move that would, again, be controlling the center as well as not moving our queen out too much, but also while dealing with that threat, maybe think about that. The best move here as black is to actually move our knight and kind of, again, block the path of the queen. So the queen it's not like a knight. It can't hop over a piece. So it's no longer able to attack f7, right? The square that I was looking to get. Instead, our knight is very beautifully positioned in the center and happily defended by our queen. So right now there's one attacker, one defender, and so that is not a safe piece for white to capture. So we are very happy with our knight on f6. You might be a little worried if you're one of our advanced players hopping into today's session and be like, oh, maybe, but I mean, my g6 pawn really weakened this king side, right? So maybe not safe to do that? Maybe I can't, maybe it's not safe to put a knight there, but I'm going to show you why it's a great move. One of the reasons why is this bishop, our f8 bishop, can very happily and comfortably go to g7 instead of c5. So and when it goes to g7, so let's say this is the position, we're very happy as black because our king is quite safe, and we'll be able to castle next turn, and we avoided all checkmates in the opening. So that's kind of maybe a little bit of a long-term thought. Now let's look at the possible next move that our dads might play. So I showed one of them. One of them is to play knight c3. That's a totally fine move. It would be controlling center, as we said, which is good. But I think our dads are still on the greedier side and still want to make something happen on this f7 square. Don't you think? So a very common, there's a couple common moves, but I think the most common one to think about is queen b3. So this queen's going to swing across, come to b3, and create one more time this battery, right? This battery of pieces, these two diagonal pieces stacking up to put pressure on our Freddy pawn, and that would make our king super uncomfortable. It does not want to move around. It would rather be very safely castled over here. So when this queen comes to b3, what are we going to do now? Should we do a queen move? Should we play queen to e7? Unfortunately, we can't move this bishop, right? Because and castle, because this move is immediate. It's coming next move. In the last Zoom class I taught, people were saying maybe pawn to d5 to put a block to that attack. That move is not terrible, but we would be conceding a pawn when you count, right? So when you put this pawn here, there is 1, 2, 3 attackers, and we only have 1, 2 defenders. So we would actually be losing a pawn when you count it out and calculate it. So we need a better move, right? Queen e7 is not a bad move at all. Queen to e7, definitely not a bad move. It does deal with this threat, and we can still bring our bishop out through this side. But let's look at the most aggressive line that will win us pieces, right? We want to gain the chess advantage, absolutely. So the interesting thing here is that we can actually ignore the threat temporarily. So this is definitely trickier, and it's going to be harder to have seen normally. So that's why I'm teaching you this trick, especially intermediate advanced players. When this knight hops to d4, we are actually conceding this pawn on f7, but it's only temporary, of course. So we're going to come to e7, and when this queen moves, we have this beautiful move to put pressure on the queen one more time, and now there's no safe squares on the diagonal for the queen to go to keep in touch with this bishop on f7. And so once the queen moves again, we will be able to be up a piece and recapture right there. So let's go back, though. That was kind of fast. Let me explain again. So when this knight hops in here, we're saying, I'm going to remove your battery, right? And I'm going to put pressure on the queen, who has moved 3 times already, right? You see 3 different queen moves. So this is a trap. So if they are to capture, we have this forced move. We can't go anywhere else. And then once the queen goes anywhere, here or here, we will be able to win that piece back in a couple moves. So comes to c4, then we have pawn to b5, protected by the knight, and with the threat of us capturing f7. So Isaac has a question. What's up, Isaac? He said, why not d6 instead of knight c6 at the beginning? That's a good question. So let's go back a little bit. There's lots of different responses and moves. Why not d6, right? I think the biggest reason why we don't want to play d6 is that we actually, in general, would love our bishop to be outside of this pawn chain, right? And because it's much more active there, right? This bishop has so much more range than when it's cramped up. And here it could maybe go here on e7, but its potential for movement is just going to be severely limited. So that's why I always recommend just playing knight c6, defend it with a piece, and develop at the same time. And then eventually we're going to be able to move our bishop with more freedom. Great question, though. Let's go back. So what happens again when we see queen h5? Let's actually look at it from the flip side. Command Shift F. There we go. Okay. Okay. So let's look at it from actually like it's our game and we're playing black. What's the best move again to defend this pawn? Isaac's move was also sufficient, but it's not the most aggressive, active way to defend. It's a knight move, right? So our knight is going to hop to c6 and defend e5, right? So when defending e5, the queen is no longer able to capture that juicy pawn on e5, which is very important to us. And so, of course, he's going to change plans and go for the scholar's checkmate, the 4-move checkmate. But we are going to very happily get in the way of his plans. We're not going to let him checkmate us in 4 moves. We're not going to move our knight and be silly. What's the move that we were talking about that really puts pressure on the queen right away? Do you remember, Isaac? Facebook Live people. So this queen, now of course unable to capture on e5. Its combination attack is now blocked on f7. So it's going to come to f3 to reapply this pressure, right? We've already accomplished our first goal, which is making the queen move multiple times, right? And we're going to continue our development now, right? So we're going to play knight to f6. And we looked at this line with queen b3, but now I think everyone remembers how to deal with that threat now, right? With our knights. And with this knight and pawn and king combination, we have a beautiful way to defend queen to b3. I guess the other line that we can think about is maybe g4, right? Because g4, I actually didn't go over this in my last class, but this is actually a scary line, right? What is this doing? This knight, this pawn, right, is threatening to move our knight. By the next move would be g5, right? And that would put immense pressure on our knight, which is actually pinned to our Freddy pawn. So if we were to move this knight, let's say we just play, something like d6, and then bang, g5 happened. We would have to move this because the pawn is worth less than our knight, and our queen is just not enough to defend it. So if we moved it, we would run into the same checkmate, right? So that's not what we want. We do not want him to win a piece, our dads to win that piece. So we have to deal with this threat. Again, I think just the key move to remember whenever playing against this opening is that we have, again, knight to d4, right? So this knight to d4 move is just so powerful. It just, if unchecked, then we are going to play that every time and make the queen move a third consecutive time, essentially. And this queen is just going to have to move off this dangerous file. Like maybe the queen will go back there to defend the c2 pawn. And then we can happily just play. We can play here. We can play here. Move our bishop out. I personally like maybe this move, pawn to d5, with the idea that once this pawn is captured, we're going to delay our capture. We'll come back to that d pawn. But we can play now bishop takes g4 and put pressure again on the queen while being defended by the knight. So there's just so many good things that can happen if white tries to do the form of checkmate on us. So I hope that was helpful and informative and prevents any quick losses to dad. Don't rub his ego. Don't let him form move checkmate you. Make him sit there, calculate moves, and you will gain the chess advantage every time with a couple just key defending moves. Again, it was g6 and it was knight d4. That's kind of it. So just make sure you're using the dad strategy, right? Defend our pawns, defend our Eddie and Freddy. So Eddie and Freddy with our knights and our pawn. And we also want to make sure we anticipate any kind of attack combination with queen and bishop. And then once we're able to do that, we're going to easily dominate these four squares in the center. And once that happens, your life will be so much easier, and you will be able to laugh at your dad at the dinner table. And so happy eating, happy chess playing.